This episode is brought to you in part by the Table Podcast from the Hendricks Center at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'm Darrell Bach, one of the hosts, and I invite you to join us as we discuss issues of God and culture, which includes anything and everything. Listen on your podcast app or at dts.edu/thetable.
Welcome to the Grace Enough podcast. I am your host, Amber Cullum. This week, I sit down with Paula LeJeune. Paula was born as a conjoined twin, underwent more than 30 facial surgeries in her first 20 years of life, and lived in a home with an abusive father. Today, she shares about the self-esteem issues she battled as a result of her facial scarring and the abuse she experienced by her father. She also shares about how she has experienced God's faithfulness through her husband, who has always seen past her scars. Before we begin this week's conversation, I want to invite you to visit graceenoughpodcast.com and sign up to receive the monthly newsletter. The newsletter includes previous episodes, book and article recommendations, favorite quotes and scriptures, the occasional recipe, and most of all, an opportunity for me to connect with you. If you sign up now, you'll receive 10 scripture prayers to calm your heart. You can receive those by visiting graceenoughpodcast.com and signing up for the newsletter. Now, let's drop into my conversation with Paula, when God's love and adversity collide. Good morning, almost afternoon, Paula. Welcome to the Grace Enough podcast.
Thank you so much, Amber, for the invitation to come. And since I've had the invitation, I've gone back and actually listened to some of your podcasts because I had never met you. And I am just honored that you picked me to be on today.
Oh, thanks so much. It's such a joy when you hear that people have listened and hopefully, you know, that something resonates, because there's just so many stories out there that God really does use in our lives to encourage us. And you're going to share your story with us today, which I'm very thrilled to hear. And so introduce yourself and your family.
Yes.
And tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
My name is Paula, which you said, LeJeune. I've been married to Clifton for 32 years. I have two daughters. The oldest is Eden. She's 28 years old, and she is a second grade school teacher, has been for 6 years. And she's been married for 4 years to Hunter, who is a CPA. And they have just had their first baby. He's 3 months old, Lincoln John, and that is my new favorite hobby.
He's so cute.
Thank you. My youngest daughter, Erin, is 25, and she has been a registered nurse for 2 years, I think. And she's been married for 11 months, fixing to celebrate her first anniversary, to Jacob, who's a paramedic. And I am fortunate that both of my girls live in my neighborhood and work in our city. And Cliff and I have pastored Jesus Worship Center in Jennings for over 26 years.
So awesome.
And so both of my girls, my sons-in-law, are very involved in our church. And I'm just very blessed to have family nearby and involved. And our church is a team effort.
I love it because one of my just dreams is, let my kids live close, because we don't.
I prayed.
I know. Well, and we don't live close to either one of our families. We did early on, but and it was a big decision to move. But work sometimes just causes that to happen. But you definitely give up something when you leave your family. It's not easy, particularly when grandkids come along, right?
Right.
And I'm sure your daughter appreciates the help. So
She does.
Absolutely. Well, when we're talking about your story, adversity is a word that really describes your life from the get-go. And so share a little about your birth and just the adversity that you and your mom faced.
Okay, I was born a conjoined twin. I am 57, so 57 years ago, they didn't have ultrasound and all the technology available today. So my mom, the medical staff had no clue what was coming. And when we were born, they discovered I was a Siamese twin, and we were joined at the chin and neck. And I was born in the kinder clinic, and my twin had apparently died somewhere in between the first and second trimester. And the dead baby was poisoning me as well as my mom. So by the time my mom was in labor, she describes like having dozens of boils all over her body.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
she was very critical, and so was I. And so the doctor in this clinic, it wasn't even a hospital, had to pick who to save
Hmm.
because we both needed a lot of attention. And so I had a sister who was 18 months older. So the doctor decided to save my mom, which I believe was the correct decision. So during the stabilization of my mom, he sent a nurse to check on me, and she reported back that I had stopped breathing and, I was basically dead. And so he knew he had made the right choice.
Hmm.
So when he was finished stabilizing mom, he came over to, I guess, do his report, a death certificate. But I always say, I guess God knows CPR, because I was breathing, I had a pulse, I was fully alive. And so then they had to start redoing and deciding what they were going to do with me. So they sent me to New Orleans to a charity hospital.
Well, and so I'm interested to know when they sent you to New Orleans, this whole time your sister is still attached to you, correct?
Correct. Now she was dead, but yes.
Right. But she's
So it
still
was
attached.
absolutely, yes.
And then when you were transferred, your mom stayed back at the kinder care, or did both of you go?
No, my mom
Or
had to
kinder
stay.
clinic?
Yes, my mom had to stay. So it was a grandmother that came with me.
Wow. Yeah, what a beginning. I mean, there's so many questions I could ask there, but I want to move on into a little bit of childhood. And with that, being medically fragile a lot of times comes to a childhood filled with a lot of surgeries and things like that. And so tell us a little bit about your childhood years. What were they like?
It was a lot of time in the hospital because of where we were joined, uh, the chin and the neck. When they separated us, that left a gaping hole in my chin.
Mm.
And they took all not just the flesh, but the bone, everything. So they had to make my chin from a rib.
Wow.
And so my chin bone, which I know you're looking at me, but the chin bone is made from a rib. And that first bone graft did not take. And so that
Wow.
it fell apart at home. So there was an emergency surgery where they had to take a rib from the other side. So that just tells you a little bit about how many scars I've had. I
Yeah.
have. I've had over 30 surgeries. But anyway, they did the second rib, and that one took. So they were just trying to get me functioning, because until they could, I couldn't eat on my own. So I had a feeding tube directly in my stomach,
Yeah.
which creates another scar. And then they also realized that we shared tongues. I have both tongues, and that the doctor took and sewed down the middle. And because of having two tongues, which your tongue is a muscle,
Yeah.
they really felt like I would never be able to speak, because you have to learn to
Control
use
both.
both muscles. I just say I have to watch what I say twice as much as everybody else.
I love that. Well, and so some of those surgeries didn't happen until teenage years. And
Right,
so,
because they had to be done as I grew. So once the emergency surgeries were done, then it was as I grew, which meant I was in school. So surgeries were done during Christmas break, summer. So a lot of my free time was spent in the hospital, which meant vacations, that we couldn't go on, and holidays where I was in the hospital while the rest of my family was at home.
wow.
And at
Yeah.
that time, children under 12 weren't allowed in the hospital. So my interaction with my siblings was waving through a hospital window.
Well, and you said you have an older sister, but at that time, did you also have another sibling?
Yes, I have a sister that's my
18 months.
oldest, and then I have a sister 18 months younger.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So that's really stressful.
Yes, but I have a total of four sisters, not counting the one that died.
Right. Exactly. Well, so tell me, did you grow up in a Christian family?
I grew up in a pastor's family, a pastoral family, but I would not describe it as a Christian family because I believe a Christian family should portray the fruit of the Spirit.
Mm,
And that was not shown a lot in our home. There were good times. I'm not going to, it was not all bad.
right.
But my father was a pastor. He actually had grew up in church, and he and my mom left the church whenever before I was born. In fact, my dad has told me, he's passed away now, but he told me several times he felt like I was a judgment for him for leaving the church, which add
Oh,
that up to the the other list of things that would cause low self-esteem.
absolutely.
But they started going to church again when I was 3, and then when I was 7, my dad became pastor at a small church here in Jennings, which my husband and I now pastor. But my dad was very abusive. He couldn't be abusive as much to me when I was younger because of the damage he could have done. But as I got older, just the meaner he got. And it's not just spanking, because I do know the difference between a spanking and abuse. I have 2 grown children.
That's right.
But when you have to hide scars, that's abusive.
Mm,
And it wasn't just physical abuse, it was emotional and mental abuse. Like, for instance, uh, leaving us with a gun and telling us he's going to kill himself because we didn't agree with something. And then calling hours later and making us beg for him to come home. But at the time, people were not as vocal as they are now.
hmm.
So we didn't share that with anybody. And we had to put on a face to go to church in
Yeah.
public. But my dad was not against humiliating us in public. Now, he would not hit us as much in public, but I had no safe space. School was my safe spot.
Yeah, which is so true for a lot of people. I mean, I don't want to say a lot of people, that's not fair. There are children who, even during this pandemic, I've thought about, wow, I mean, school is their safe place, and now
Right.
they don't have that. And it is very heartbreaking when you look at it from that perspective. But it sounds like the same things, the same type of abuse was happening to your sisters as well. Is that correct to
Yes,
assume?
absolutely. Yes.
And so, if I can dig a little bit there, I mean, how did your mom handle that? Was she being abused as well?
She was, and she was scared to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was worried about supporting herself and 5 children. And she also was worried about what would happen if she left.
Mm,
We would beg her to leave.
yeah.
But by the time she did leave him, we were all married except for my youngest sister. And she actually waited till my dad was in a different country on a missions trip to pull that trigger. And I mean, that's a whole nother story. I could be on a reality show because my mom left my dad, and 2 weeks later, she was divorced and remarried.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's,
So that was a whirlwind of emotions, of changes in our family. And it was just a crazy time.
well, and I think about the fact that he was pastoring a church, and we are so much more aware now of the secret lives that people
Right.
can lead. But it still never ceases to amaze me. Like, how did we not know? Or did we
Right.
know when we didn't pay attention? And so, my question to you is, did you ever get the feeling that people in your congregation were like, what in the heck is he doing? Because it sounds like he pastored at this church for a long time.
Yes, he pastored for 25 years and now we've pastored it for 26. So some of the people did know, but I believe the anointing flows down. And so there were a lot of abusive people in our church.
Mm.
So when we became pastor, our church was running about 120, and my husband and I joke about getting it up to 50, but a lot of those people had to leave because there was a lot of immorality in leadership because my parents were immoral.
Yeah. And so when did you personally decide, despite all that's going on, I believe that Jesus is my savior? He is the one that can redeem me. And I don't want to say set me free from abuse, because the reality is sometimes we're not rescued from our circumstances, but from hopelessness for sure.
Right. The furthest back I can remember, I was about 7 years old. And I remember being at an altar and praying and asking God to help change my life.
Mm.
And there was always a time in the surgeries where you had to go. When I went in to go to surgery, I had to leave my mom
Mhm.
and I was all alone. And several surgeries were done in Christian hospitals.
Mm.
And so when they would wheel you in the pre-op room, there were scriptures taped to the ceiling. And I remember reading those scriptures and just thinking, that's the kind of God that I want to serve, because children get their view of God from their fathers.
So often, that's
So
so true.
I did go back and forth to where I believed that God was waiting to punish me for something wrong,
Mhm.
to know he really does love me and he wants to rescue me.
Mhm.
But it was a process over years where I had to realize there was something wrong with my dad and there's nothing wrong with God.
Mm. Yes, yes. And I mean, we can even attribute it sometimes to what we see in our mother, too. I know personally, I struggled so much and still do at times with, well, I can lose your love. If I don't
Yes.
perform a certain way, then I don't. I mean, yes, that goes along with earning it, but for me, it was more the fear of losing it. And
Right.
so it's interesting how that dynamic can work, and how so many times people can turn away from God because of what they've experienced. And it's amazing that that is not what you chose to do, to the point that you end up, you're a teenager. We all know as a tween and a teen, you just get ridiculed even when nothing may be
Right.
wrong with you, right? Like you're
Right.
like, um, despite nothing going on physically, you don't feel like, you still get made fun of.
Right.
And so, what were some of the things that you look back on now and you see really affected what you believed about yourself, what you believed about God, relationships, all of that, as a result of the way you got teased, um, from all of the scarring and stuff?
I had to get really comfortable with people staring at me, which I don't know that I've ever really gotten fully comfortable with that. I remember a lot of times walking into a room and just doing my best to hide somewhere.
Mm.
The first days of school were always I was always very anxious during those times, the night before school would start, which I know because my kids went through some of that, just the anxiety and anticipation of the first day. But I just would have to psych myself up, because if I could get through that first day and make a few friends, then I could get through the rest of the year.
Mm.
But in reality, instead of getting easier, going into college was actually worse, because
Mm.
every semester you have a different group of
Yep.
people you're with in every class.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember several nights before that first day of college crying and thinking, I'm going to quit. I'm not going to go through with this. But at that point, no one in my family had a degree. That was one of the things I realized. I can't change the scars, but I can change other things about myself. I can learn to fix my hair. I can learn to dress better, and I can get an education, because we were also very poor.
Oh,
So
yeah.
people in the community would drop off bags of clothes to our house
All
because they
growing
felt,
up.
yes.
Yeah.
So I remember days getting up for school and digging through those trash bags, trying to find something to wear and putting it on and wearing it to school unironed. So that added to the kids teasing, because
Right.
I looked odd and I didn't dress well. My clothes didn't always fit. But I learned how to take control of the things I could change. And just to make a friend, I did pick up a bad habit of people pleasing
Yeah.
that took me into being pastor for years before I learned how to put boundaries and stop doing that.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too. You were still undergoing several surgeries during your teen years.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
every summer and Christmas break.
And so
So
then you would come back into school.
with fresh scars, bright
Okay.
scars that, unless I just wore a paper bag, they showed. And so I was very, very self-conscious and would pray before I go to bed for God to let me be normal when I woke up in the morning. I don't even know what normal is, but let me be normal tomorrow. And it didn't happen. And as I grew, I realized I can't control everything, but I think I'm repeating myself, but I took control of what I could change. My room was always clean. My clothes were always done and ironed.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that I am curious about is did you ever have anybody in your life that kind of helped keep you going? Because when home is not your safe place, it sounds like getting control of whatever you could helped spur you on. And that is a people pleasing thing. That's also, a lot of people will get depressed. And then there's other people who are like, I'm just going to be the best at everything I can. And that's how I'm going to deal with the pain I'm experiencing. Did you ever have any mentors, or was there somebody at your church that kept you grounded in God? Or was it just that you kind of just pressed on?
There was no one. My mom was one that pushed me when I would tell her I was going to quit college because I
Yeah.
was
So you were
anxious.
close with her, even though she
Yes,
was,
yes. Even though she knew of the abuse and did nothing. Yes.
yeah.
uh, she did push all of us to become better, and she ended up owning her own business and doing well for herself before she passed away a few years ago. But my sisters, my especially my older sisters, would I mean we were a team, and when
Mm.
we would go into school or places and they felt like people were staring at me or being rude, they would make me want to climb under a chair because they were
They
very
were,
defensive for me. So I think all my life God put someone to be my ally,
right.
but it was different people up until my husband.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to talk about that a little bit for sure because, you've said like your deepest longing during that time, and maybe it was up until you met your husband, was just to be removed almost or to be free from all of it. And so during those long years of the surgeries and the scarring, how did you really see God's provision and Him coming alongside you when you met Clifton?
Well, my parents had given me permission to date when I was 15, and I really didn't think anyone would ask.
Mm.
But God surprised me, and I did have dates. My husband will tell you quite a few
Hmm.
because I think he stalked me. But when I met him, really met him, I think I knew about him, but I met him when I was 19 and he was 14. And before I get judged, he looked older. In fact, he came to know the Lord whenever he was 14. And when he was 15, he decided he knew he wanted to be a minister. And he decided he wanted to go minister at the parish jailhouse.
Okay.
And he walked in and told the jailer, I want to minister in the prison. And they let him up without checking an ID. So
Oh my
he was
gosh, are
like,
you serious? Like, that's so unheard of now.
yes, 15 years old. He's like, oh my goodness, I am in the jail. And he
They were
went
probably
to,
like, "What's this kid going to do? We're not worried about him."
but they had no clue he was only 15 because he looked
Oh.
19 or 20. So he tells the story. It makes me kind of sound like, I'm after children, but he looked older. So anyway, he asked me out and I just laughed. I was like, you don't have your driver's license. I'm not driving anybody around on a date. And so I think God helped me have self-esteem and not settle. But when he got his driver's license, I let him take me on a date, but we really just became friends. And he would tell me often, I'm going to marry you. I'm going to marry you. And I had such low self-esteem. I was like, okay, there's something wrong with him that he would like me. He's got a problem because I didn't like me. So if anybody else liked me, then there was something wrong with them.
Wow.
And we became extremely close my last year of college because of surgeries and stuff I had to take off. It took me longer to finish college than just the 4 years. So my last semester was his first.
Okay. And you all went to the same university
Yes.
and stayed friends this whole time, even though really you were probably about 4 years apart in school, or 5?
Yes, but we went to the same church. He
Right.
went to my
The whole
dad's church.
time.
Yes. So in college, we were able to hang out more.
Yeah.
And just one day I was talking to my mom about him, and I realized that, I was always looking for someone in dating that would look at me past the scars, because you can tell when someone's talking to you what they're looking at. And I would go home and say, he didn't see me. He was staring at me the whole time, staring at the things that were wrong. And so after that semester, after spending 3 months with Clifton more than once a week, I realized that when I was with him, he saw past those scars so well, I would forget I had them. I felt like I was normal when I was with him.
Yeah, and do you feel like that was really the first time in your life?
Absolutely.
Besides maybe, because what about with your sisters? Your sisters had always been with you, so they...
No, I felt normal with them because,
right.
We played, we fought, we got in trouble together. My parents did not treat me differently because there was something wrong with me. I think that's what helped me talk and everything. That was a plus for my parents.
Yeah.
I was never treated like a handicapped person. In fact, I never even heard the word applied to me till I started college, because I was considered handicapped. The state paid for my education.
Okay.
Because my parents had not saved up any money, and I really wanted to go to college.
So from the time you met Clifton, if you can recall this, to the time you guys actually got married, how many years do you know that he had been?
6.
Like 6. Okay.
6. Steadily pursuing me. There probably has not been a day that has gone by that before cell phones, that he has not said, "You're beautiful." He would leave me notes on my car. He would date other girls and ask them, "Have you ever heard of Paula LeJeune?" And then he would get upset because they would break up with him. And they were like, you were all he wanted to talk about. We didn't want to go out with a guy talking about another girl.
That's so awesome, though, because, it's really hard to question someone's love when you hear something like that. And, you're right. You still struggle with that when you have these self-esteem issues that have followed you around your whole life.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And the notes now, the letters that he wrote while we were dating, and even after we got married, I have some of them enlarged and antiqued, and they're over our fireplace in our bedroom.
Wow. How
And
precious. And you all have been, tell me again, you said at the beginning, you've been married for how long now?
32 years.
32 years. And so how did you get to the point where it was okay, we're going to go back and we're going to serve in this church that we grew up in that you obviously had a lot of history
Yes.
with?
Well, my parents asked us to take the church for a few months. We had no
Was your husband
clue.
a pastor at this point?
No, we were just serving in my dad's church.
Okay. But
Uh,
were you all out of college at that point?
yes, we were
Okay.
married.
Okay.
And they had asked us, we actually had our oldest child by that time. I think we had been married 7 or 8 years. And my husband was minister. We were both very active in my dad's church, but we would also go out and speak for other churches. And my parents kept after us for a few months to take the church and give my dad a break. And we had no clue why they were persistent. It was not what we wanted. And during that 6 months, two things happened simultaneously. One, some of the fruit of our labor started to come in. People began attending uh, through our Bible studies, and God just gave us such a burden for our church and our city.
Mm,
And also in that time, both of my parents had been having an affair, and those affairs came out to us. It didn't become public, but it became known in the family. And we realized that we were a cover, but
yeah.
also that my dad was not going to be able to come back and take it back. Even though he
Wow.
tried, he never stopped being mean till he died. There was just a lot of opposition from my dad after all this came out. But God, we knew we were called. We thought it was maybe just for the transition to the
Right.
next pastor. But 26 years later, we're still here.
What do you think kept you serving in your dad's church as an adult, even though you knew that he was really a fraud?
I think I was like my mom. I didn't know where else I would go.
Mm,
And the thought of not being able to associate with my family, because he made it clear several times that if we left, we could not have anything. It was almost cultish, if I can use that word.
the church at that time was
Not the church, more my dad.
your
More my
dad.
dad. My dad's, his leadership style
I
was,
gotcha.
and he was very charismatic. Like when people met him, they still come up to me and say, "I remember your dad. He helped me." He was right to all the wrong people.
Well, that's what I was going to ask because I know, I mean, I don't know exactly what you're talking about because I've not lived that reality, but I know the story of this person gave all their good to people out here,
Right?
and at home, we received everything that was painful. Would you
Yes,
say that's true?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Man.
In fact, at his funeral, his best friends at the time that spoke, we didn't know who he was.
Wow. That is
We had never
incredible.
met him. So my dad didn't. He had a few long-term friends, but if they opposed him, then he didn't have anything to do with them again.
And so, what was it like taking over the church that you grew up in, but you also were growing up with the pastor, and then you slowly start seeing change and health, and people start being exposed. And I mean, now you're 26 years in, but what was it like those first 4 or 5 years?
It was very scary, and it
Mm,
was a huge learning curve. Uh,
yeah.
God that is where I started having mentors who were healthy mentally, and God just ordered our steps
Wow.
where just we had a fabulous pastor that became our pastor in that time. And so we no longer had to figure things out for ourselves. We would call him and he would say, okay, this is the next thing you need to do. And since that time, we have never been out from under the covering of a pastor. Even though we are a pastor,
Right.
we have all, our pastor passed away 3 years ago. But before we knew he was going to pass, he was an elder and had started having health problems. So we put that pastor in place, that our pastor now, he was already ready to step in that role before our last, because we never wanted to be out from undercover and be left figuring things out.
I mean, even just the accountability of it
Yes,
is vital.
absolutely. Just the wisdom of a pastor who's pastored longer than we have and dealt with,
Yeah.
larger congregations and even worst case scenarios than we were going through. Just having that wisdom is priceless.
That's absolutely right. Well, you do, as we kind of start closing out here, you have written a book, Unfairy Tale. And you told me earlier that the reason why you really wrote it is because there's a story that you kind of share when you speak to groups. And people would ask, do you have that in book form? Tell us a little bit about the book in hopes that by the time this airs, it will be available for purchase.
Yes, I am in the process of getting it available for sale on Amazon. But the book, An Unfairy Tale, which may or may not be changed by the time
Yeah.
it goes to Amazon because of a conversation with Lisa Whittle, is a biography of my life written in a fairy tale form
Hmm.
so that children can understand what it's like to grow up being different. And it's not just a story, a biography, but it's about taking control of the things you can change in your life and not settling just because you're not like everybody else.
Hmm.
Because it's the little things that you do either take control of and accomplish throughout your life that determine your future. And I dated guys that wanted to fix me, who now I look back on, if I would have married them, my life would have been, I would have been miserable.
That's
Even
right.
though I had a mate, and God helped me, just my relationship with God helped me to make good choices. Even though I couldn't control a whole lot of my childhood and the things that were happening, I could control my reaction and what I did. So this really is an unfairy tale gone right
Yeah.
because it ends very well.
Yeah.
And God has blessed me with a phenomenal marriage. I have a marriage I've never seen. I have a family, my relationship with my kids, which because of how I grew up, my husband and I both tell people, if you want to know who we are, don't ask the community. Don't even ask
Mm.
the people in our church. Ask our kids.
Wow.
We want you to ask our kids.
That's a, and that's bold. And it says a lot about your character that you would say that's what we want.
Yes, we actually travel and do marriage seminars
Yeah.
also. And there have been a few times where we've put our kids up on the platform and let the audience ask questions. Like,
That's
we're not
awesome.
scared. And
That's
we've
so
had a
awesome.
pastor say, y'all are really brave to do that. But we just want to live a life from the inside out, that we don't have to hide things.
Well, and that's the thing. I think about something like that, and let's say one of your kids did get up there and said something that kind of shocked you or surprised you. That authenticity is still what you want, right? Because
Right.
if
Yes.
you don't know, you can't change. And if you're that afraid, it probably means the conversation needs to be had.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, for the woman who may be walking through adversity right now and listening, how would you encourage her that her current circumstance does not have to be her future?
just through 57 years of living, I would say this is what I had to do: ditch the victim mentality. I was a professional at throwing my own pity party. But victimization allows other people to be in control of your life. And because victims can only react. So I would tell that woman, take a long, hard look at your life and decide which things are in your ability to change and start working on those things. Because right choices eventually bring out right results. But doing the wrong thing will definitely lead you on the wrong path. And just the story of my life, that I couldn't change my scars, but I could change how I looked. Other than that, I could change my education. I could pray and ask God, as a last story, my dad, a year before Cliff and I began dating exclusively, he was angry with Clifton over something else. And he had told me if he caught me talking to Clifton, that he would throw me out of the house. I wouldn't have a home. And I knew if I lived on my own, I couldn't finish college. I didn't have a good job. And so I was just insistent on making it work. I was going to move out as soon as I graduated from college.
Yeah.
But so a year later, and you already know how abusive my dad was, Cliff and I started talking, and we wanted to date, and we knew we would end up getting married. And so, but I was submitted to my pastor because I knew that was right in the Word of God. And so I was 24 years old by this time. And so I told Clifton, I'm going to go ask my dad, who is my pastor, if I can date you. And if he blows up, which he did that on a daily basis, if he gets angry, then it's not God's will for us to be married. But if he says, yes, go ahead. So when I asked him, when I worked up the nerve and asked him, my dad just looked at me and smiled and said, absolutely, go ahead. Yes, you can date him. Wow. So I knew that this was God's will for my life. But God helped me in the midst of chaos, in the midst of living in a terrible situation, to make right choices and not to run from home just because it was a bad place. I made the best of it until I could get out. And I made a right decision in who I married.
Wow. Wow, what a testimony, Paula. Well, if women or any listener wants to connect with you, just whether to be encouraged or questions or just follow along on your journey, where can they best do that?
I'm on Instagram as Paula LeJeune. Paula, of course, is spelled the same. Last name, LeJeune. I'm on Facebook as same name. My email is tooemom, TOOEMOM @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, Paula, thank you so much for encouraging us and sharing your story today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was nice meeting you.
What resonated with you from Paula's story? One of the many things that resonated with me was her commitment to change the cycle of self-esteem struggles for her two daughters. Will you share it with me on Instagram at GraceEnoughPodcast_Amber? And don't forget to visit GraceEnoughPodcast.com and sign up for the monthly newsletter.
Thank you for listening to the Grace Enough Podcast. Tune in next time.